Welcome to First in the Family, where we explore the world of breaking generational patterns due to access, education, will, or sheer bravery. We celebrate the ways that these accomplishments bring about joy. We honor the way that these changes can lead to discomfort and to pain. And we grieve the sacrifices that all of it requires. My name is Cecy, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. Let's see who's first. Today's guest is Ezekiel Dixon-Román. Ezekiel is a professor of critical race, media, and educational studies, and is the director of the Edmund W. Institute for Urban and Minority Education. He is also co-founder and director of the Institute in Critical Quantitative, Computational, and Mixed Methodologies and the Critical Computation Bureau. His research seeks to make cultural and critical theoretical interventions towards rethinking and reconceptualizing the technologies and practices of quantification as mediums and agencies of systems of socio-political relations. He is the author of Inheriting Possibility, Social Reproduction and Quantification in Education. He's the recipient of the 2018 Outstanding Book Award from the American Educational Research Association. And he also co-edited Thinking Comprehensively About Education, Spaces of Educative Possibility and Their Implications for Public Policy. Welcome to First in the Family, my friend.
Thank you. It's exciting.
It's so nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for making time. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy. Man, I know we're zooming for time, but I really appreciated everything you had to say in the pre-survey. I loved how you challenged and sort of like just the premise of being the first, which has not come up in any of my interviews. So I want to talk about that for like 3 hours. And then for another 3 hours, I want to talk about your background. You shared that you are the first in the family to attain multiple degrees. You're first in the family to switch religions or leave religion altogether. And I know you mentioned identifying as agnostic.
Yep.
So that's another 2-hour conversation. And not only do you have multiple degrees, but you're a tenured professor at 2 Ivy League institutions and you have a PhD, of course, which congratulations, because that's freaking amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think I heard it's like 2% of PhDs are folks of color. Is that right?
That's a good question. I think I know that the last that I heard was in relation to the number of full professors that are of color, and I think it's around 4%.
Wow.
So yeah, and then that's probably correct about PhDs as well. Of course that varies depending on field.
Right. Because there's some fields where we got a ways to go.
Right.
Well, either way, kudos to you. And I know it is very well deserved. So very quickly, so that folks know who you are, what you do, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at Columbia University.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a professor of critical race, media, and educational studies, where I'm at Teachers College, Columbia University, where I'm also the director of the Edmund W. Institute for Urban and Minority Education. I just got to Columbia as of January 1. I was at Penn, as you know, for 14 and a half years.
Dang! Had it been that long?
It was that long.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
Yeah.
Columbia's all right, too. Shout out to Columbia.
Yeah. Penn was hugely important to be formative of my scholarly career and getting things going. And it's exciting to start this new phase in my career at Columbia. Much of my work is around critical and cultural theory of technology, particularly technologies and practices of quantification. Much of what I wrestle with and I'm interested in is how power and logics of raciality are working in and through the technologies, in and through the machines, in ways that are shaping sociality, shaping racial formations in society in a cloaked way, right? Because it's the machine is understood to be objective or impartial, right? And so we it often can be seen as innocuous and undetected or unrecognized, but in fact, in the very logics of the system, part of what I'm up to in my work is to literally trace how the very logics of the system is steeped in colonial logics of racialism.
So are you literally talking about like social media, technology, algorithms, or is it like even beyond that?
So I'll deal a bit with social media algorithms like Facebook, like the Facebook ad algorithm, but also I've done work on an AI robot for children. I've done work on a learning analytics platform for essay writing. I've done work also on predictive policing. So yeah, it ranges. And much of what I go after is what I talk about as algorithmic governance, and not in this traditional sense of kind of the use of machine learning or algorithms more broadly in public policy, but more broadly is an understanding of algorithmic governance being about the kind of logics, rationalities, and even control and disciplining technologies of everyday life, of the quotidian, even what we are engaging in right now with Zoom and the platform of Zoom, how Zoom itself also has its own rules, logics that is even governing how we can even interact and engage via its platform.
Damn.
It's fun stuff.
That sounds fascinating. And I'm curbing my enthusiasm because I know we have a short interview today, but I have so many questions
I'm
about
sure.
that. I'm going to be like, oh, how do we decentralize whiteness out of Zoom? And girl, this is good stuff.
Yeah. So we can have that conversation a whole nother time.
Can we do a part 2?
Another episode, right?
Because I need it. See, this is the problem. I need a part 1 just to be like, how you doing, boo? What's going on? How you feel? And then part 2 could be the episode. See, that's my problem. No, this is really fascinating. And so the idea of first in the family is something that you raised in your survey as somewhat problematic. And I'd love for you to speak more to that. I don't know if it sort of is a good segue from the work that you're doing and the lens that you sort of keep inside of this work.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that as I was thinking through that, the question itself, and even the idea of being first in the family, or just even being first, period, right? It made me think more about, and even brought me back to some ideas that I really started to think about when I became tenured at Penn. And I was a first Latinx faculty member in the over 100-year history in the School of Social Policy and Practice at Penn.
Wow. I don't think, did I? I think I actually did know that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know if you knew that or not, but yeah.
Wow.
And one of a few Black faculty members that was hired. Like when I first got there, I only heard of literally like 1 or 2 other Black faculty members that were in the school. Yep. And I still to this day do not know if they were tenured in the school or if they came with tenure, right?
Right. Which is a big difference in academia.
Right. And so but when I was tenured, I there was all this, praise, right? You finally got successfully got a Black or even Latinx faculty member through the process, right? And my thinking was, well, that's fucked up. Why would you praise this? You should feel ashamed. Yeah. You should feel ashamed to even say this. And in some ways, I even was thinking, I even thought about it as a way of, as almost a window into the need to call the lie out of the institution. Right? Literally, I'm in the supposed social justice school at Penn, And took over 100 years to get a little higher, let alone get a successful tenure case through that was Latinx. That is absolutely horrendous and unconscionable. And it says so much to the lie of its own supposed values. So when I thought up through this question, this notion of being the first, that's what immediately came to mind, even as first generation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It says so much about how far we have not come. Right.
Yes.
To be first generation and at this day, at this moment, with the number of institutions that there are in this country, there is no reason why that still is the case, right? Mm-hmm. And let me say this. I did work in Cuba for several years. And one of the things that helped me to do, that helped me to bring perspective to, is that a system can be structured such that everyone is required to get 6th grade or 8th grade, 9th grade, 12th, or even at least some degree of higher ed. That system can be structured in a way that it is obligatory or required, but has built-in flexibilities for what people's needs and desires are, right? Mm-hmm. So what I learned from Cuba was it's possible. The problem is the structure of the system requires, and when I say the structure, I'm really thinking about the system of political economy of capitalism necessitates inequality. It necessitates a social division of labor. It necessitates those who are working in certain positions of decision-making, those who are in the positions of owning, those who are in the positions, and those who are in the positions of producing. So why do we still have first generation? Even for college? It's because the system needs it.
Right. So in some ways, being the first is only celebrated because it's not supposed to happen. And somehow
that's right.
Snuck in.
That's right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting is I don't necessarily think this is at odds with the premise of the show at all, because I think that's sort of where it was birthed out of, is the fact that most people, when I say like, I'm the first in the family to graduate college and get a master's and get a house and people are like, you did it, girl. Yes.
Right.
And I've been experiencing that my whole life. And what I haven't had the outlet to do is just express all the pain and angst and frustration and like pressure and confusion and feelings of like perpetual displacement.
Right.
About because you're the first.
The trauma, hands down, without a question. You didn't get there without trauma. You didn't get there without the violence, the forms of subjugation, the ways of trying to make you feel inferior. It didn't come without that. It came with that without a question, because it's not supposed to happen.
Yep.
So you getting through now. Here's where I'm gonna bring a little social theory in for a moment. Bring it. So, one of the things that Pierre Bourdieu will talk about is the idea that, for there to be meritocracy, the myth of meritocracy, for it to continue on, which we know it doesn't exist, right? We know that the system of meritocracy is bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. But in order for that myth to continue on, it necessitates for some of us to make it through. Because if some of us don't make it through, then the very possibility is completely structurally foreclosed. It's symbolically foreclosed, and it literally will take out any hope for something else. As long as some of us can get through, and that is seen, says a lot about when you have all these ads, when colleges have these ads or employers have these ads that show us on the face, but when you get there, we ain't really there.
Right.
But it literally, that kind of performative work in the ad symbolically is shaping the possibility, the hope of a system that really is not.
And that's what keeps it in motion, right? Is the notion that, oh, maybe.
That's right.
Maybe I'll get there. I mean, I've spoken about this with a couple of guests, but it's very much taught to aspire, right? To get out, right? That's the line, is you got to get out of here. And that's what drives you as a child. It drove me, right? Like, that's the goal. And then I got out. Yeah. And when you get to the other side, it's like a dystopian film where you're like, I want to go back in, but you can't go back in.
Right.
Because you're never the same.
You're never the same. Alfred Lubrano, I think, captures this so well in his book, Limbo. And it's all on first generation.
Oh, I'm about to buy that today. Yes. Limbo is the perfect word. I haven't read the book, but limbo is the perfect word. Yep.
It's part biography, part interviews that he did with like over 100 people around the country, that were all first generation, capturing this very idea of, as you go through higher ed, you're increasingly becoming more and more socially distant from your social origins. And you're moving more and more toward that which you'll never be completely part of. You're always, to some degree, uncomfortable in that social space that you are aspiring toward.
Yep.
I never feel comfortable in the academy. There's always some degree of discomfort, especially in these Ivy League institutions.
Yeah.
Right. You figure out your ways of navigating it. Right. You figure out your ways of also coping. Managing the various forms of trauma that, I mean, we still continue to encounter every day.
Yep.
And we keep on keeping on.
Listen. And I think what is so important to name, but also part of what I'm hoping this space will start to create, is to name that this pain is there, but to like grieve what it takes and what you have to sort of shed and lose in order to attain those firsts, in order to break through a place that you'll never fully be welcome in, to repeat what you said. But there's so much grief that comes with it that has, I feel like, no place to talk about it or to be with it. I've shared with folks, like, I live in the suburbs. I'm the first in my family to have a house. My kids go to public school, and guess what? Public school is the best school I have ever, like, it is what people pay thousands and thousands of dollars in inner cities to attend. And I feel grateful. So like, let's not get it twisted. Like, this is what I wanted for my children. And yet every single day that I have been here, I feel so out of place. And I feel this longing for something that I can't even name.
Now that's deep. Longing for something that you can't even name. That's deeply unconscious, deeply of the unconscious. And that's difficult because when you can't name it, how can you obtain it, capture it, acquire it, or move toward that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's almost imaginary at this point, because I don't want to live back in the hood where I grew up in. Right. Like, that's crossed my mind before. I'm like, damn, maybe I should just go back to Dykeman. Shout out to Dykeman. Right. But I don't feel that place there either.
Right. And it's a different place.
Can we talk about that? Right. That's another show.
Right.
But it's so real. And I'm so appreciative of you naming this. And I especially like we're wrapping up season 1 right now. And I think it's such an important reminder that like, this is not a coincidence that we're all experiencing the same angst, right? This is not, it was not hard to find guests, and that's for a reason, right? This is very much by design.
Yep.
So I'm just thankful for you and reminding of this.
Absolutely. And don't get it twisted. We should celebrate our accomplishments. Yes. That's definitely not, I don't want to be misinterpreted in that sense, right? Hands down, I was excited when I got my master's, when I got my PhD, when I got the Penn, when I got tenure, so on and so forth.
Yes.
But also taking the moment to pause and reflect on what does this in fact mean? Yep. Why am I the first?
Yep.
And one other thing is, so there's two things I'm thinking about: the notion of getting out, and the notion of moving toward that which we aspire to, that we never fully become or are welcomed in and fully part of, right? So first of all, I just want to call out in both of these is whiteness, right? And why do we seek to get out? I mean, this is deeply a colonial narrative.
Yep.
A colonial narrative that is constructing a particular space, particular people, as primitive, as partially human, right? As inferior. And you should seek to want to get out of the deep, dark Africa, the deep, dark I'm trying to think of that, the actual language that was used. I mean, think
the savage ways of
exactly. Yep. Right. The jungle, right? Even that kind of, that get out is deeply in line with that same logic of thinking. And I think the other part that's so deeply important here, and is something I'm wrestling with and working through on a project on poverty and economic mobility, that's actually still going on at Penn, that I'm still part of, I should say, where we're doing work in Philly, New York City, and Charlotte, and trying to capture what are the processes and opportunities and mechanisms for mobility, for economic mobility. What are the voices, conditions, and experiences of poverty? What can be done? What can be done to change people's opportunities, and even shift the discourse politically and of policy? But one thing that comes up is what's really difficult is when the discourse is about getting out. What happens is those of us that do go to higher ed, we gain our credentials, increase in economic mobility by way of occupation and even income, but we don't go back, right? Yeah. So the investment that was made into us in the communities that got us to where we are, we don't bring it back.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it becomes a perpetuation of the concentration of economic poverty, and lack of mobility, and I don't want to say desolation; it's a strong word, but isolation, right?
Yeah.
So how to change that, I think, is a deeply important question. Related to that is, how do we change the narrative from what forget the narrative? How do we change what we do from moving toward, I'm gonna call it out, whiteness, toward moving toward creating our own? Because if we're creating our own, then it's less about being welcomed and feeling comfortable in. We're creating our own, that we are, where we're creating our own comfort, if you will, our own fit. And that's, I think there's limitations to that, right? If you want to be a professor, you're limited in obviously how where you can move for that. Yet,
right. There's consequences for wanting to create your own.
That's right.
I think it's potentially, in theory, possible, but there are very real world consequences.
That's right. That's right. But I do think that today, more so than ever, there are even greater opportunities for creating one's own, depending on the profession, depending on what one is doing. And when I say that, I mean that by way of what is enabled by the opportunities via digital media, via what I see as a number of urban centers trying to create more expansive opportunities for startups. And to be quite honest, what is going to be, what I see is increasingly the case because of AI, the need for more and more folk trying to figure out their own ways of production, their own ways of income. Because what's going to increasingly happen is the number of jobs is going to continuously decrease.
100%.
So that doesn't mean that there's not going to be other ways of being.
Right.
I think it's actually going to create even more opportunities to be creators.
Yeah. A new economy.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Exactly. Like you're doing right now.
Hey now. Did you hear that, universe? And yeah, I think that's an interesting take because in many ways, this whole like advent of artificial intelligence and machine learning and this new age of technology has been very unsettling and scary for me specifically. But I like the frame of this could potentially be an opportunity to redesign the way sort of you make it, right? Like in society. And it is a threat to sort of traditional capitalism as it was designed originally, which is always a good thing, in my opinion. Yeah. So I like that frame that I thought about it that way.
Yeah. The commodity is becoming increasingly data.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think actually the trick, if you will, that the major tech companies have been able to pull off is giving the facade that they're giving us a free service, like Facebook, right? Google.
Yep. Oh, none of that is free.
Instagram. Oh, no. Because every time we interact with it, we're producing something for them.
Yeah.
And they use that.
Oh, yeah.
And, many, many ways, including how does ChatGPT come about? It's because of our interactions, what are seemingly free interactions on the internet. And now what is OpenAI doing? They use all that data to create a whole host of programs that is now becoming monetized, right? So I think hands down, without a question, capitalism is being reconfigured, but in quite cunning ways.
Yep.
At the same time, I am saying too, let's be cunning as well. Right.
I think that's man. I wanna continue this for 2 hours, but I think there's an opportunity there, and I'd love to explore what that could mean, especially for Black and Brown people, because even the data has been rooted in white supremacy. Yep. So what does it mean to essentially be inside of the untapped fields of society, right? Of interaction, of culture that has not been an integral part of this collection of massive amounts of data. Right. And what does it mean to be at the helm, right? Of like all these, gold mines, essentially, that nobody has ever wanted to step into and excavate because it wasn't valuable.
Right.
Oh my God, stop nerding out with me. We have to have a part 2.
No, absolutely.
You cannot do this to me.
Definitely.
But before I let you go to your call, you sure to get canceled? Okay, this is going to be a big question, but
Mhm.
as succinctly as you can, given this is the focus of your work, right? I imagine you wake up every day and this is sort of like the lens you put on in most spaces, which I think is fantastic. However, it makes me curious how you navigate your personal story, right? You're like you mentioned, you're still proud of your achievements while being present to like what it costs. You mentioned sort of leaving your family religion of many generations. You're the first to, I'm sure, have access to certain spaces, conversations, including things like this. So what has that side of being the first been like on a personal level? And how do you navigate it given what you do, right, for a living and what you know?
Oh, that's a big question.
5 minutes. You got 5 minutes.
All right. Let me see if I could do some acrobatics. Yeah, matter of fact, I'm gonna send a text message. Hold on.
I did it.
Oh, because I know I can't answer this in no 5 minutes.
Sorry. It was a bait and you took it.
No. It's okay. It's okay. Okay. So, all right. Where I'm going to begin my response is I grew up in a family of activists. My father was part of the Puerto Rican Student Union in the early 70s. My uncle was a young lord. My other uncle was an attorney to the Young Lords Party. My aunt was part of the Puerto Rican Student Union. My family was part of the takeover of church in El Barrio, took over City College, took over Hunter College, Puerto Rican Studies. The Center for Puerto Rican Studies exists because of the work that my family and others did to take over Hunter College and bring that to being. My uncle was part of the takeover of Hostos Community College when they were trying to shut it down. Right? I grew up in a family where social justice was the discourse. In fact, outside of that, it's a problem.
Right.
And so there was a particular sort of form and even value of social justice, and one that was arguably lodged in a theological understanding of social justice, right? So, and in some ways, I might even say there was a kind of a melding too, because both my parents grew up in the church. My mom, Amy Zion, my father, Protestant. I forget, or I forget exactly what denomination, but then also, as a result, I also grew up Amy Zion as well, and then eventually Baptist when we moved to the South. And so so you have this activist orientation of social justice, while at the same time, this theological sort of understanding of social justice, right? So, and yet, as I remember being, and when I was in high school, going to a church in Durham, North Carolina, this Baptist church, and there was this very fire and brimstone message it was just deeply homophobic. And I remember thinking then, very early on, I'll just say, I remember thinking then, if God has, if God thinks, or if God's position is such that doesn't matter what kind of life you live, if you walk in the way of Jesus, right? But you're gay, then you won't make it into heaven. When I heard that, I remember it. It was around 10th grade, I think, thinking, I don't want that God.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a God that I am. And to turn someone away.
Yep.
I later learned that this was a kind of a question of theodicy. And when I went to grad school, and mind you, at that point I did not turn away from religion. I just was like very, very suspicious, and I had not gotten to my own sort of thinking and resolution to around reconciling these questions of theodicy at that point.
Yeah.
So was still going to church, and I hands down experiencing dissonance as a result.
Yep.
There were aspects of what I learned and sort of frames of mind and ways of viewing the world that became deeply helpful for me in navigating the world. But then when I went to do my master's at the University of Chicago, and I was working on, and I was studying Marx, it then began to become a bit more clear what my wrestles were. And why the ideology or the discourse of the church about a metaphysics of God was so deeply troubling, and began to understand that the institution was doing particular work and particular functions, right?
Yeah.
I, eventually became came into my own as being agnostic and not atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why I say I'm not atheist is because I'm comfortable with the uncertainty of the existence of God. In some ways, I would even go as far as say, I don't care. My concern is human suffering. Right. And for me, atheism is another belief system that I just choose not to go to, if you will.
Yep.
That said, of course, growing up in a family that was very deeply religious, or is, right? That has often been a touchy topic. I mean, I will just, my mom knows. I think my dad knows. I don't, but it's not something I'm not as public about with it. And part of that is also because I also want to respect others' systems of belief and ways of knowing the world itself, ways of engaging and being in the world. And the minute I say that I'm agnostic, it opens up this line of questioning that I get concerned can be in through the line of questioning can become violent toward others. And so I and also with that, if it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah.
Right. The church is community, and I'm granted it's more than that, but it is community. And if it's addressing human suffering, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, as long as where I will push back on is when I do hear the violence, the symbolic violence, right? So yeah, it's complicated, right? It's a complicated way of being. But also for me, I know when I finally came to that resolve of being agnostic, it made life easier.
Mm. Say more about that.
So, in Christianity, at least the theology of Christianity is one such that you have to meet certain rules, commandments, and if you don't, then your way into heaven is put into question, right? Once I came to understand my understanding of there is no God, and if anything, the universe is that which we have often thought about or called a God. And that when we leave this, when our physical, we merely are dissipating into the universe and becoming, evolving or reconfiguring into whatever the universe has in store, right? Renourishing and becoming in a multiplicity of different ways. The soul, the spirit is the only thing that, and when I got there, it became easier to say and think and be that on the one hand, there's a lot at stake in what I do and little, right? So there's a lot at stake socially and politically for the moment and even for future generations.
Yep.
And Earth in its existence, right? But there's also little at stake.
In the grand scheme of things.
In the grand scheme of things. So that, for me, it made it really helped to make this thing we call life a bit easier. I mean, not too long ago, I was talking with a group of my grad students that I had, and one of my postdocs that I had. We went down to American Studies, the annual meeting for American Studies Association in New Orleans back in November. It's the last day on our way, getting ready to go to the airport. And a couple of us, we were running a bit late. And I said something like, they were getting all riled up. And I was like, we can get going. And they're like, how are you not nervous or anxious? I was like, it's not that serious.
Yeah.
It really is not.
Right.
And I've had that sensibility for a long time. And it's helped to not give significance to things. Not that. I still, hands down, will give significance to things and take things seriously, yet while at the same time understanding the grand scheme of things, it's not that serious.
Right. It's just a choice.
Exactly. It's a choice. It's an event. And guess what will still keep on going? The world.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's powerful because I hear a lot of parallel to your orientation of like the institution and the system. And what I'm hearing in your orientation in life and faith is liberation, right? From the confines of what theology can force us to subscribe to. And as I'm sure you know, and many folks know, Christianity is very much tethered to colonialism. And so I get it 150% and have navigated and wrestled with similar thoughts. Of course, I have like 35 more questions.
Of course.
But I appreciate you so much. I'm going to let you go, but really quick before you go, how can people reach you if they want to reach you? I know we're going to do a part 2, but just in case.
Yeah. So I can be reached via email at E as in Edward, D as in David, 2115 at tc.columbia.edu. TC for Teachers College. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'll write all of those letters and numbers down in the description in case I missed it. Awesome. I appreciate you. I'm hugging you tightly.
Likewise. I
want 3 more hours.
No, seriously, let's do another one. I thoroughly enjoyed this and have so much more I'd love to share. This
I have so many questions.
All right.
I appreciate you. You too. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye. What I loved about what Ezekiel had to say today was that he really reminded us that the premise of this podcast is rooted in the fact that our system, our institution, our society, this country was very much designed to exclude certain people, historically Black and brown peoples, at its origins. And over time, more and more different groups of people from different spaces. Throughout the season, we have discussed folks who have been the first to attend higher education institutions, folks who have been the first to date and marry someone outside of their race, folks who have decided to shift away from a theological religious tradition or to pursue a career path that might have been considered strange or impractical or unusual in some way. And what I appreciate about today's conversation is that it reminded us that this is by design. And the folks like us who have taken those risks and decided that we wanted something different, while I believe it's something to celebrate and can often lead to new opportunities, wonderful moments, escape from deeply troubling circumstances, it also comes with a very high cost. And I really appreciate the balance of perspective. No thing is one thing. And while I personally can sit here and really feel proud of the journey I have led, of the accomplishments I have achieved, the life I'm creating for my children, I can concurrently hold that it has come with pain, suffering, ostracization, judgment, malignment, and trauma. And I think it's important to create space for both of those truths. So I don't know if this will be the final episode of the season. I think it should. I'll discuss that with my producer, but I really am grateful to always be grounded in the reality of what's so. I think oftentimes some of us are guilted into remembering how lucky we are, how fortunate we are, how good life is. Don't be negative. Look on the bright side. And while I'm definitely someone who tries to always, find a positive inside of a situation, I also think it can be dangerous to, in any situation, refuse to see another side of reality. Whether we're having a conversation with another person about politics or religion, whether we're reflecting on our own lives, the space for nuance is so important. And if you're unwilling to acknowledge the many facets of every situation, no matter how wonderful or terrible they may seem, then I think you put yourself at risk for almost forgetting how to do that. And that's the way indoctrination works, is that eventually we start to believe the things that people are saying and believe them to be wholly and absolutely true, as opposed to a part of the truth. I'll close with this. Ezekiel reminded me of this story today when he was talking about his departure from his family church and how painful it was to hear messages that didn't resonate with the values that he held. And when I was 10 years old, I believe, my mom and my stepdad, my mom was alive at the time, we lived in Queens, and they rented out the basement of our house. We had a two-story home. In the basement, we rented it to a family, the single mom and her two sons who were, I think, when you're 10, everybody seems so old, but I think they were probably like almost adults, like maybe 19, 18, around there. I just remember them being like big. And they were Mormons. They were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they would invite us to their church all the time. They were also Latino. And I guess at one point, my mom was like, yeah, sure, we'll come. And we went, and it was lovely. I mean, wonderful, truly, truly wonderful. Great people, great services. I was a kid, so my side of that world was like activities and snacks and games and songs. And I wasn't quite present to any theology or belief system per se. I knew that we were singing about God. I knew that we were in a religious space, but beyond that was sort of hazy. And we started to attend regularly, and I loved it. I always tell people, I think I was born with some kind of tether to a higher power, because I wasn't raised religiously, but anytime I set foot in any single church, I loved it. I was like, yes, I will have what they're having. And this was no different. I wasn't present to denomination or sex. Like, I was just, this is a cool space. And I inherently just believed that, and knew, not believed, I just knew. I think I was literally born with it, because never ever was I taught that you should subscribe to any particular set of rules. And so we started going, and I thought it was awesome. And eventually, I think it was probably maybe a couple months, maybe even weeks. You're invited to consider joining, becoming a member, and getting baptized. And that was, a no-brainer to me. I was like, yeah, this place is awesome. I love everybody. We're having a good time. Sign me up. I'm not sure what it was like for my mom. Again, I was 10 years old, so it wasn't really the kind of conversations we were having. Although I see myself having those conversations with my kids at that age, because they just built different. But I said yes, and I don't think my mother did, but she was totally supportive if I wanted to do it. But you had to sort of complete these courses. They would come over to the house and do these modules. It was almost like in preparation for baptism. You had to read the Book of Mormon, different passages. I forget the name of the other book, something like something Pearls. I forget what it is. I'm sure I can Google it. And, I loved it. And the Bible, of course. And I was like, cool, this is great. I was like, they would quiz you, and I was passing it. And then came the day I would officially be told or tested and told if I could like get baptized. And so it was like a quiz. It was like a final test, and I got all the questions right. I think I maybe missed one. I was like nervous, but because I really wanted to do it. And at the end, they were like, "Okay, we think you're ready." And what I appreciated about the Mormon Church, even now, is that there was this emphasis on the decision being yours, right? They wanted to know that this is actually something you wanted and not like your parents said so. So I thought that was kind of cool. And at the end, they asked me a question like, okay, are you like ready to embark on this journey and, live for God and to be baptized like this Sunday? And I said, yeah, like I am, sure. But I have a couple questions for you. Yeah, at 10, I might have been 9. But anyway, they're like, oh, okay, that's cool too. So I think I only asked like maybe 2 or 3 questions. And the first 2 had more to do with like what we were learning. And I don't really remember that. But my last question was, so I've been studying this, for a few weeks, attending the church. I really love it. It seems all very positive and wonderful. But I have a question about my family that's not here. So, I had my grandma, my brother, my aunt, and I said, I think they're mostly believers. Like, I don't think anybody doesn't believe in God. But they don't go to church. They don't, read the Bible, and they're certainly not Mormons. And the possibility of them becoming Mormons is pretty much 0. So my question is, are you telling me that because they're not taking these courses that I'm taking, that I happen to go to because somebody happened to rent our basement apartment, that they're going to hell? Because if that's the case, then I don't want to sign up. I don't want to do anything that just assumes and presupposes that my family is wrong and I'm right. I'd rather be wrong with them. And the elders, I remember they kind of chuckled and they were like, okay, little girl, good question. But they gave me one of the best answers I think I've ever received inside of these kind of conversations of theology and faith and religion and rules, right? And what you're supposed to do versus not. And I always held on to that. And I think it very much became sort of the foothold of why I've never really strayed away from the idea of God governing my life. Now, I have shifted religions. I have explored other churches. I was a Mormon for a few years, and many people don't know that about me. And I don't look back on that with any kind of shame. I actually had a wonderful time in that church. But I was curious about others. But what they said was, so our answer is, we believe that the ultimate absolute truth about God and the afterlife and all of that exists. And we like to think of it as a glass table. And somewhere in history, at some point, this glass table got shattered by humans because, humans be humaning. And different religions and different sects picked up a piece of that glass table. And we'd like to believe that we have the biggest peace. That was it. That's all I needed in that moment was at least a bit of self-awareness to know that there's no way that you guys are 100% right and everybody's 0% wrong. And if you can explain and acknowledge that reality, then I think what you're doing is great. And they did, at least for my 10-year-old mind. I think I'd probably ask a few follow-ups today, but I really, really deeply appreciated it. And if I knew the names of those elders, I would totally shout them out. But it was so many years ago. But that was such a fundamental core memory and grounding moment for how I would later build my spiritual life. That became a critical foundational piece. And as a result of that, I was able to navigate many different churches, many different sort of spiritual practices in a way, in this like voracious kind of exploratory way that I think has only enhanced my connection to God. And while I don't choose to be a Mormon today, because there are certain pieces of doctrine and their practices that I'm not aligned with, I truly appreciate just the real human and down-to-earth way that they approached it. And now I don't know that every elder, every leader in that church would have answered that question that way. But whoever was in charge of Hollis Queens in 1992, 3, and had a little girl ask that question, you changed my life. And so I think those kind of, that kind of perspective and orientation is so critical in navigating this very complicated, often painful world that we're in. And it can't just be 100% one thing. It can't just be you're always right or you're always wrong. And nothing is 100% good or 100% bad. And I think this podcast has really dug into that and really excavated not just the different facets, but like the benefit and the beauty of that process. Because when you're able to dust off all the dirt and really hold your life, your journey, what you're discovering, what you're learning as a whole piece with many different perspectives. Some are painful, some are wonderful, some are terrible, some are great, some are challenging, some are confusing. That's when you truly can step into your life with clarity, with perspective, and just grounded in something, I think, that's more solid than be thankful all the time or like life sucks, or like, you know, some of the tropes that we've heard is like, get out of here as fast as you can, get out of the hood, graduate. Like, none of these paths are the right paths, and none of these paths were the wrong paths. And the purpose of First in the Family is to remember that and create space for the fact that, like, this is hard. Figuring all of that out is hard, right? Staying humble and thankful is hard when you're navigating a world that no one in your family has ever navigated, right? Not becoming bitter is hard. And showing up and working towards acceptance, if that's what you choose to do, is hard. And you're not alone. You are not alone. There are so many of us that are on that same path. And I hope that whoever's listening, I hope that if there's one thing you take away from, even if it was just one episode you listened to, that it's that you are not alone on this journey. There is no blueprint or rule book that that you missed. There's no secret meetings being held on how to navigate this. We are all trying to figure it out. And we're all experiencing many similar things that you are. And if we talk about it, then it just might get that much easier. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing some time with us these last few weeks. I'm so deeply appreciative of your time, your sharing, your listening, and your journey. My name is Cecy, and this has been First in the Family.